Welcome to the video on social sustainability. This one is all about people, and the current dialogue is that it's either all about health and safety, or it's giving back to the community, like sponsoring local sports clubs, to ensuring representation at leadership levels, to ensuring there's no modern slavery or child labor in your supply chain. Well, it's all of that. And that's why this video is conveniently short, because it is also, like the environmental impact category video, very context specific. And this area of sustainability is harder to measure and track. Well, at least with environmental issues, you can track the pollution, water usage, whatever it is. But with people, some areas can be subjective to personal preferences and entire cultures. So we're going to dive in and firstly kick off by saying that, like environmental sustainability, there's a thing called carbon tunnel vision, and we've been focusing a lot on carbon, but there's all these other issues that are within the sustainability transition that we sometimes forget. And likewise with social tunnel vision, in modern countries, there's a lot on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. B is added on. But this is why there's also been a lot of pushback in this area. So we're also starting to see that kind of equalize, and more attention kind of come back to everything else, which is also really important. So just so you're aware, those categories there with diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging are just another part of social sustainability, part of ESG, which is sort of the main idea is not to mess up the planet and people. That's why we're doing it. While you do your thing. No one's saying don't do business. They're just saying don't mess up the planet and communities while you do it, right? And that's sort of the crux of social sustainability. And it's really ultimately about human dignity, making sure that workplaces are safe, that if they're children, children are being children and not working for penance. And it's a tough one because there's a lot of these sort of practices that are happening that people are just not aware of. And some of it even comes from development sector programs. So you look at, and it's not just the Gates Foundation, the UN, Oxfam, a lot of these really big INGOs have been criticized all over the place because some of their programming has hurt communities more than it's actually helped them. And in many cases, it was better off just to have given them cash than to have gone in and created all kinds of economic issues or debt problems. And debt problems are massive because they lead to social sustainability issues. They lead to modern slavery. So people give up their lands or things because they get microfinancing and they can't get out of it. So they give up their farm because the crops aren't producing necessarily enough things and they can't pay back the bank. So, and if you're purchasing from suppliers who are sourcing from these people, you might end up in that inadvertently or without having to expect it to. So there's a lot of complexity to supply chain problems when it comes to child labor, modern slavery, and a few other factors as well. So here's an example. Here's me 10 years ago in Cambodia. There's our first sort of like environmental thing, and I was like, hey, I'm starting this company. I want to do better. I'm going to put some of our profits into more socially sustainable areas. And so we went to these train tracks in Phnom Penh where there was just rubbish everywhere. This is after we'd collected it. And we thought as a part of the program, we would do some education for recycling and waste management. And so these families and people wouldn't live in it. And they could separate their trash and try and get people to pick it up. And from one of these conversations, a volunteer came up and said, this is not only not working, but this is really dumb. Because we were trying to give out things like there were sandwiches that we were giving out. We were giving out free water. People came and collected it. They filled out a survey. There was a father who said how kind of tone deaf this was. He didn't say tone deaf, but he said, I'm so worried about trying to feed my children. The next day, I can't even process what you're saying about separating my rubbish. And the other thing in Cambodia, well, over the last 20 years, was a much bigger issue. Now it's getting better. But you have problems where you have families who will get their children picking up plastic bottles to sell to recycling facilities, because that's how they will feed their whole family and children. So they don't have time to take the kids to school if the school doesn't feed them. So it's more complex than what people think to say, oh, these parents shouldn't be making their children work. I don't think you understand the full context behind real poverty in some of these countries if you're saying that. So there's a lot more context. So that certainly changed how we started doing a lot of our programming and design. A lot of trying to understand really where people are. And this is why there's been quite a bit of pushback against DEI, specifically DEI, is because it focuses on individual-driven nature. Like, I have to account for you not being offended by certain words or certain things. And that's why a lot of people end up pushing back, because they're like, well, this isn't fair, because DEI talks about respect for the individual, equity and opportunity, psychological safety for a person or certain peoples, and empowerment and voice of certain people, whereas social sustainability as a whole is talking more systemic and more everybody. So like fair labor practices, access to resources, community engagement, cultural respect. It's not that it doesn't, it's just that in the West, why there's been so much pushback is because it seems, and it's become very individualistic. Or it became very individualistic, but more on this in a minute, because it's also, there's some nuance here as well. So I've made an executive decision to stop the video here, but you can continue watching for the following content, because it is still quite interesting, but it's not essential for the accelerators or the masterminds. But just to close it off here and to give you some really clear pathways on what to do next to improve your social sustainability, the first thing is to map and measure, I guess you're not surprised, your impact. So health and safety, well-being, of your employees, and compliance areas for your supply chain, your team, clients, their customers, and communities that are impacted by your presence. Right? So there's a lot to measure here, a lot of surveys, a lot of people observing, a lot of conversations. You do need to do your due diligence on your supply chain. This is also now an EU requirement to make sure that you're not using child labor, there's no modern slavery in your supply chain. Which, fair enough, because if you really think about it, it's quite upsetting and sad to see. Number 3, get them reports ready for risk mitigation, because compliance is on its way, and so is due diligence and auditing. You want to train and develop your leaders. This is where it starts. You want to train everybody. Everybody sort of needs to be aware of health and safety, well-being, compliance issues that are related to people. But it completely starts from your leadership, because if you have all these programs and initiatives running, but at a company talk team building, your leader is like, oh, whatever, like, it sort of like brushes certain things under the rug, it completely undermines all these initiatives. So you want to make sure that your leaders actually believe in it as well. And from here, you want to recruit great advisors, because this has also got so many different areas, technical areas as well, which I'm not an expert in. So you will see more videos from me quite shortly with interviews with these experts. So there's one more video after this which you can watch that's a part of this immediate part of the accelerator. But if you're interested in listening to a little bit more about why there's been so much DEI pushback, then watch on. So I will kick off with one example of why there's been so much pushback, is with microaggressions, which is the subtle and often unintentional comments or actions that can marginalize individuals. They are a crucial and complex part of the DEI conversation. It certainly makes people feel uncomfortable. All kinds of people uncomfortable. So someone actually felt offended or sad about it or genuinely hurt. So, for example, I get this a lot actually. Where are you really from? They look at me and they think I'm American. I'm not. Never stepped foot there. From New Zealand. So I got this a lot in New Zealand. So they're like, oh, where are you from? I said, I'm from here, from New Zealand. They go, but really? And they look at my face. They're like, clearly you're Asian. Statements like all lives matter, seen as a microaggression. I don't see color, but I don't see color as an issue, because it means that, well, I'm potentially ignoring the fact that you and your people in my community, this community have been facing some form of racism. And you're like, well, I'm not a racist. I don't see color. And then you've got on the other side of the spectrum, things where it's a little bit past the line. For example, mispronouncing a name, to using incorrect pronouns, or complimenting cultural clothing. Oh, that's so exotic, I love it. But that's seen as a microaggression because you are appropriating their culture. And more recently, I've heard this one: putting up Christmas decorations it's exclusionary or disrespectful to non-Christian employees. I'm recording this currently in Poland, which is predominantly a Christian Catholic country. So it's a bit odd to hear sort of these sorts of comments. So a better way of sort of saying this would be, instead of saying that's so exotic, you would say, I love your outfit. What's the cultural significance? And the intention is not to shame the speaker. The issue here is that we're really sort of missing the point of communication and even offering a compliment. is because you miss the human connection. There is a level of oversensitivity where people are more and more saying they feel like they're walking on eggshells. But on the other hand, you can't completely ignore this either. You don't want to undermine any attempts at genuine inclusion. So you need to have a conversation about it, or else you lose the ability to connect on either front. And that's why there's so much polarization in places like the US. And on the other hand, people quietly feel a little bit sad because they think, well, I'm being ignored, or people don't really understand me, and I feel kind of lonely in this community. So as a leader, you kind of need to be aware of this and know that you're walking the line and you got to learn. But there is pushback because, like we're seeing in the States, pushback number 2, 3, and 4 is that DEI is becoming, or did become weaponized, ideological, complicated, and just incredibly political, and all about just not trying to hurt other people's feelings and making them feel included and safe where they are. So just coming back to that point earlier about the nuance with DEI is that it's become weaponized, where you see headlines on media, both from the left and the right, completely skewing what people are saying. It's just sensationalist media. So you put, for example, these two things. This is an actual meme put together on, I think it was Quora or Reddit, where somebody said, hey, Boeing makes strides in diversity and inclusion, and then that year, later on, a few months later, Boeing Starliner fails mission. And they put these pictures together to give people the assumption that this is the reason why, that you hired women or people of color or people from another country, and that's why these things fail. Well, what are you really trying to say there? Are you saying that people from other races cannot do like engineering jobs? Like, what are you saying here? So there is a subtle line, and sometimes not so subtle line, of racism that's actually happening. So you do need to do your own research and not trust all the headlines that you're seeing from anywhere. It's really sad. And lastly, this is why there's been a lot of push. The big one is that it's lost the spirit of the movement, which is about empathy, the idea that you feel for others, and that's why you include them, because you can feel the suffering, or you're feeling that they're lonely, you're feeling that they're not included. Or from a commercial perspective, your customers, you feel like they're not enjoying using your product, right? So you include them in the design process. That is genuine DEI work, right? I'm going to skip this example that I had from the USAID one, but essentially, I'm going to skip this. So what good DEI work kind of looks like is, for example, Lael producing Braille bricks, or like blind kids could figure things out, like what colors that they're using or what shapes they are. You've got airlines figuring out better seats so people in wheelchairs can get in and out a lot easier. You know, or hotels figuring out for their guests that have children or just people with autism, and they have spaces just for that. I think that's amazing. Imagine if you're a parent and you have to deal with these issues. This is genuine inclusion, and it makes you feel happy as a customer. I'm going to fly with them again. I'm going to tell all my friends that are in my network about this hotel, or I'm going to buy more of this for my niece who's blind. Great. So ultimately, if we're looking at social sustainability, and simply put, it's about looking after the people that you're affecting, from your purchase decisions to your business decisions to your selling decisions. So there's a lot of different decisions that you make in your business that you may not be aware of. So it's really important to help map that out on a people journey map and see what it is that you're able to do. And one thing that I will say to leave you is probably the biggest tip here is to practice upekkha. This is the compassionate attitude that we talked about in the leadership session from a Buddhist meditation on empathy, on compassion. And that's the idea to open your heart to the lessons of your head, because some of these procurement, supply chain decisions that you have to make, or with your team, with your customers, are going to be very difficult. So open your heart up to the lessons of your head. It's not just about giving away money. It's not just about giving aid left, right, and center. It's really about thinking about the outcomes from the decisions that you're thinking about making as well. So on that note, this kind of topic is really helpful over a discussion. So I look forward to seeing you in the Accelerator or the Masterminds. And if you have any questions on this, feel free to send us a direct message. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video.